All right, so let's get underway. If I can get control of the screens. All right, so brief introduction. My name is Michael Levy. I am the CEO and one of the founders of WorkProud. We've got a pretty simple value proposition, and that is we believe that all of us should be able to finish a day and be proud of the work that we do, and ideally also proud of the company and what it works for. And our approach to doing that is fairly methodical. We've been doing it for some 20 years. First is, let's get an understanding of what's happening out there in terms of your populations and the level of pride that individuals have for their job that they do, whether janitorial, administrative, business operations, etc. Using that data, our knowledge, skill, and expertise will make some recommendations on how you might influence the individual pride or pride in the company. We'll certainly share some best practices, learning and expertise, having done this for some 20 years, on what are the big influences that one can create in terms of building individual pride and/or company pride. And then subject to the needs of the particular business and the client situation, we've got technology and tools and platforms that can help along the way. So, that's a very brief summary on us. You can get a copy of the WorkProud study from the website. You can sign up for the newsletter, the Inspired Workplace, on the website. And of course, we would happily provide and share some information about the platform that's used and how it's been applied by various companies over time and what kind of impact they've had. Today is the first of the Inspired Workplace education series. We'll be doing these monthly. We have a great speaker coming up in the following month. We'll share some information about that. But the purpose of these webinar series are to bring some smart people who happen to know a lot more than we about, things that they've seen around human behavior, what influences human behavior, and how some of those influences may be, turned to align towards building, pride and creating workplaces, that are inspiring. We want to have thought-provoking interviews with individuals that can share information and insights about what motivates employees and what builds workplace pride. I think it's a great aspiration in this time and day and age. We've got the technology, we've got the living standards. Certainly in the US, we've got the opportunities. Let's see if we can also, tap into the concept that says people should be able to finish a day and say, I'm proud of what I've done. 3 takeaways from today. I don't want to get ahead of our great speaker, but what we hope you'll come away with from this particular episode is, one, what kind of regrets, what are the top regrets that employees might face in this time, day, and age. 2, how do these regrets play a role or appear or manifest in a workplace environment? We all may have personal regrets, but what's that concept within a workplace environment? Where do regrets play in? And 3, most importantly, are regrets not the opportunity for improvements, and whether that's improvements in the human interactions or the work that's one done or the perception of what our day-to-day experiences are like. These are some of the takeaways from today. So in thinking about how will we launch the Inspired Workplace, we wanted to find somebody that was interesting and dynamic and knowledgeable. And occasionally, and all of us can relate, you come across these individuals that are energetic and enthusiastic and knowledgeable and with credentials. And, I believe that that's who we've, brought. And I'm excited to share, Daniel with you today, but I thought it'd be a good little introduction to get a bit of background, on the person, and this might help explain why we also selected him today. So before the more formal introduction, I wanted you to get a bit of a feel of Daniel and some of his history and background.
There are a lot of things in our lives that make us angry. So what can we do to calm people down? We found a place with a lot of angry people, an impound lot where people had their cars towed and had to pay to get them back. We decided to use a color, a special color of pink. We painted the entire office in pink, even the telephone and the computer. So when people walked in, they got a sea of pink. And you know what? It calmed them down. So when you think about this toolkit that you have to change behavior, don't forget about color. It's a lot more powerful than you think.
So consider that as one of the takeaways from today. But a bit more seriously, I'm honored to introduce Daniel Pink. Many of you probably would know of him. Daniel has some 5 or 6 New York Times bestsellers: Free Agent Nation, The Future of Working for Yourself, The Adventures of Johnny Bunko, The Last Career Guide You'll Ever Need, A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future, Drive, The Inspiring Truth About What Motivates Us, When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, To Sell is Human, The Surprising Truth About Moving Others. And, the book today, Dan's recent book, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backwards Moves Us Forwards. So without taking up any more time, appreciate everybody's introduction. I'll drop off and let Dan take it away. Please enjoy it.
So thank you, Michael. Thanks for organizing this. Thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this latest batch of research that I think you'll find interesting and relevant to your work, and actually probably connected to some of the things that WorkProud is doing. What I would like to do here is answer this question right here, which is, how can we build cultures in which people can do their best work and be their best selves? I think that's the question that a lot of us are asking right now as we come out of this pandemic. There is a sense out there that we're turning the page, that we're rebooting, that we're starting again, that we're sorting things out. And so I think this question is top of mind. How can we build cultures in which people can do their best work and be their best selves? And even to deepen the urgency of this a bit, how can we build cultures in which people can do their best work because they can be their best self? And I have an answer, a preliminary answer, not the final word at all, but an answer. And it comes from an unlikely place, and that is the emotion of regret. Now, stick with me for a second, because a lot of people don't quite get this at the beginning, which it makes perfect sense. So what is regret? Regret is that stomach-churning feeling that the present would be better and the future brighter if only, and that's regret's catchphrase, if only you hadn't chosen so poorly, decided so wrongly, or acted so stupidly in the past. All right? So regret is an emotion. It's an emotion, and it is, to put a very fine point on it, a negative emotion. It's an emotion that makes us feel bad. So, it's unlikely that this would give us the clues to how to build better cultures, but if you stick with me, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. And in order to do this, I have to actually recalibrate our understanding of regret. The conventional view is that regret is something to be avoided, that regret makes you weak, that we should be positive, and that we should not look backward. And that view, that philosophy of never having regrets, of always being positive, of never looking backward, of avoiding regret at all costs, the belief that regret makes us weak, is erroneous, to put it in a very kind way. This philosophy of no regrets is not an effective blueprint for living, and it's not accurate in what the science tells us. So I want to just recalibrate your understanding of regret and then move on to answering this question about how to build cultures of meaning and purpose and pride and significance and productivity and excellence. So there's about 50 or 60 years of research on this subject. I only want to talk about sort of 2 big ideas from this research. There are 2 big ideas from this research. If you understand this, we can make our way to the next line of inquiry. The first thing that we know about regret from social psychology, from developmental psychology, from neuroscience, from cognitive science, from an array of fields is this: regret makes us human. Regret makes us human. Everybody has regrets, and I want to say that again. Everybody has regrets. Let me say it a third time. Everybody has regrets. Regret is one of the most common emotions that human beings experience. It is arguably the most common negative emotion that human beings experience. It is ubiquitous in the human experience. Everybody has regrets. The only people who don't have regrets are people with brain damage, people who are sociopaths, and little kids whose brains haven't fully developed. Not having regrets is the sign of an undeveloped brain or a diseased brain. Everybody has regrets, and this is extremely important to understand. I have regrets, you have regrets, everybody has regrets except for 5-year-olds, people with brain damage, and sociopaths. Everybody has regrets. Now, this raises an interesting puzzle because, as I said before, regret is unpleasant. I don't like experiencing regret. So you have this emotion that is widespread, but that is unpleasant. Why? Why would it still exist? Why would something so unpleasant be so prevalent? And the answer is very simple. Because done right, it can be useful. So the second point here, remember the first point is that regret makes us human. The second point is this, that regret makes us better. That when we treat our regrets properly, and that's a big if, and we're going to get more to that, when we treat our regrets properly, this emotion, this misunderstood emotion, can be a powerful force in our lives, a powerful positive force in our lives. Now, treating it properly is essential. What we don't want to do, we don't want to ignore regrets, all right? We don't want to be these people who get tattoos that say no regrets. Say, I have no regrets. I have no regrets about anything. I'm always positive. I never look backward. That is a form of delusion. At the same time, we don't want to wallow in our regrets. We don't want to ruminate on our regrets. We don't want to steep in our regrets. That's bad too. What we want to do is we want to deal with our regrets in a systematic way. And I guess what irritates me a little bit is that when people say no regrets, I don't have any regrets, they say it as if they're demonstrating courage, and they're not. It's actually false courage or performed courage. Real courage is staring your regrets in the eye and doing something about them. So, to recap 50 years of science, everybody has regrets. Regrets make us human. We have a systematic way to enlist them to help us improve. Regret makes us better. Regret makes us human. Regret makes us better. Now, once we sort of disabuse ourselves of some of these biases against this emotion, we see something else, which I think is more intriguing for our purposes here today, and it is this, that regret can clarify what we value. Regret can clarify what we value. So here's how I know that. So not only did I look at 50 years of science on regret, but I also did 2 big pieces of research on my own. One of them is something that I call the World Regret Survey. The World Regret Survey. So what I did is I set up a website and I invited people all over the world to submit one of their big regrets. We got an amazing response with just, I think, 2 tweets and 1 newsletter mention. We ended up with 15,000 regrets from around the world. 15,000 regrets from around the world. The survey remains up. We now have, take a look at this, we now have an astonishing 20,000 regrets from people in 109 countries. 20,000 regrets from people in 109 countries. This is a massive and fascinating trove. It is this incredible collection of stories about human aspiration, about human achievement, about human frustration, about human thwarting, about human flourishing, about everything. It is mind-boggling to me to read through this and to see hundreds of regrets keep coming in every single week. So 20,000 regrets from 109 countries. Now, I actually, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I read through the first 15,000 of these regrets. And the question that I was asking myself is, what do people regret? What do people regret? Now, this is an intriguing question because scholars have actually looked at this question before. Scholars have investigated this question before. And the way that they've looked at regret is by the domains of life. So they say, so in the early days, researchers said, I'm speaking mostly about Americans. Americans tend to have education regrets. The biggest kind of regrets that Americans have are education regrets. And there was somebody who did an analysis of, I think, 9 or 10 studies showing that, and they discovered something kind of peculiar. Yet, yes, all these studies showed that the biggest regrets people had were in the realm of education, but all of those studies were done on college campuses. So if those studies had done in hospitals, maybe people would have had health regrets. And so one of the first studies that was done, that was a random sample of the US population, showed that when they asked the question, what do people regret? And they put them into these categories: career, education, romance, finance, health, whatever. They found that people regret a lot of stuff. I also did my own piece of very large survey research, not different from this World Regret Survey, something called the American Regret Project, which was a very large public opinion poll of the US population. I found that people regret a lot of stuff. All right. And so looking at the domains of people's lives isn't particularly revealing. However, these 15,000 regrets that I read through, up to now 20,000 regrets from around the world, are revealing if we go through systematically and listen to what people are saying. So, because what I found is that around the world, people express over and over again the same 4 regrets. The same 4 regrets. These regrets have little to do with the domains of our life, and everything to do with a hidden layer of motivation and aspiration that sits just underneath. So what I want to do is I want to go through some of these regrets, give you some examples of them, and then I'm going to try to make the case that understanding these regrets is a form of clarifying what we value. And when we clarify what we value, we begin to see the ingredients of a coherent, meaningful culture. So the first category of regrets are what I call foundation regrets. Foundation regrets. Let me give you an example. Foundation regrets, here's a 43-year-old man from Tennessee. He says, I regret not saving money diligently ever since I started working. It's nearly crushing every day to think about how hard I've worked for the last 25 years or so, but financially I have nothing to show for it. All right, this is a classic kind of foundation regret. Foundation regrets are these small, seemingly innocuous decisions we make early in life, each one of which is not cataclysmic, but whose accumulated force can really make our lives unstable. So what does that mean? This one is a good example. A classic example of it is saving too little and spending too much. I saved too little and I spent too much. I wasn't prudent with my finances. There's not a single person in that 20,000 who regrets saving too much money. Nobody regrets saving too much money. So these are failures of prudence, of conscientiousness. So these are people who smoked. We have a lot of people who regret smoking, mostly from outside of the United States. People who regret not working hard enough in school. People who regret not taking care of their health. We have some people who regret not starting to read books for leisure until later in their life. These are things where again, no single decision is inherently destructive, but together they snowball and create some serious problems in your life. And so foundation regrets sound like this. If only I'd done the work. If only I'd done the work. So those are foundation regrets, one of our big 4 categories. The second category are boldness regrets. Boldness regrets. And let me give you an example of how these things cut across domains. So I have so among American college graduates, it's rather astonishing how many regret not studying abroad. Not studying abroad for American college graduates is a big regret. Okay, so that's an education regret. I also have legions of regrets from all over the world about not asking people out on dates. X years ago, there was a man or a woman who I really liked, I was attracted to. I wanted to ask him or her out on a date, but I was too chicken to do that, and I didn't, and I've regretted it ever since. Hundreds of those from around the world. Men, women, gay, straight, across the board. That's a romance regret. I also have regrets about people who say, you know what, I stayed in this crappy job for years and years and years and years and years and years. But what I really wanted to do was start a business, but I never got around to doing it. I never really had the gumption to go out and become an entrepreneur. That's a career regret. So here's what we've got. We've got romance, we've got education, we've got career. But deep down, in my view, those regrets are all the same. Those are regrets about not taking the chance. You're at a juncture in your life. You can play it safe or you can take the chance. And when people don't take the chance, they regret it. Not every single time, but lots of the time. Lots more than we think. And even taking the chance and having it not work out is often far less regrettable to people than not doing anything at all. And I can't emphasize this enough, how much it spans domains. That said, you see this especially in the realm of work. These boldness regrets come out in the realm of work. Let me give you one example here. So here is this is a classic kind of regret. She says, I wish I'd taken more career risks. I played it too safe. That is this is actually a pretty representative regret here from these 20,000. People regret playing it too safe. Very rarely do people rejoice playing it safe. They regret playing it safe. And as I said before, while some people regret taking risks, not nearly as many as you would think. And even people who took risks, say starting a business, that failed, even they feel less regret than people who didn't do it at all. We see, again, over and over and over again in the realm of work. Here's another example. This is it says, I haven't been bold enough in my work life. I focused on not failing rather than succeeding. I focused on not failing rather than succeeding. This is a common regret. Not being bold enough, focusing on not failing rather than succeeding. You see this also in the world of work in another dimension too. I have huge numbers of regrets all over the world about people saying that they regret not speaking up. They regret not speaking up. Not speaking up at work, not saying what they want to say, not having their voice heard. So boldness regrets sound like this. If only I'd taken the chance. If only I'd taken the chance. If only I'd taken the chance. Let's go to the next one. These are moral regrets. Moral regrets. Moral regrets are when, once again, we're at a juncture. We can do the right thing. We can do the wrong thing. We do the wrong thing. People regret it. So this is a 43-year-old woman from Tennessee. She says, I made fun of a kid in middle school, dubbing him Ziggy for having a short, stubby body and spiky blonde hair. I'll never forget the look on his face as he realized the name would stick. It was cruel, putting me in the power position after I had endured years of bullying myself, but I regretted it immediately, and I've never done anything like that again. So moral regrets are regrets that people have about those kinds of transgressions, about doing something against their own moral code. The big things are bullying, marital infidelity, sometimes cheating in school, those kinds of things. Let's go to the next one. This is the next. So moral regrets are, if only I'd done the right thing. If only I'd done the right thing. So we've got foundation, we've got bold, we got moral. The final category, which ends up being the largest category, are connection regrets. Connection regrets. Let me give you an example of this. Connection regrets. This is a 48-year-old woman in Pennsylvania says, I regret not taking time to be a better friend, sister, daughter, letting time slip away and suddenly realize that I'm 48. This, again, is a pretty typical kind of connection regret. With connection regrets, they're ultimately about relationships, and not only about romantic relationships, but about the full spectrum of relationships we have in our life. So you have a relationship, it was intact or should have been intact, and it comes apart. And they usually come apart slowly. They usually come apart without much hubbub, without a lot of drama. And what happens is that somebody wants to reach out, they don't reach out, they think it's going to be awkward, and the other side's not going to care, and they drift apart further. And as this drift continues, it becomes even harder to reach out. People become even less certain that the other side is going to care, and so the drift continues. Sometimes, often because of death or other circumstances, it's too late. This is a huge category of regrets. And it's not, when I say relationships, I just want to emphasize, it's not only about romantic relationships. In fact, it's not mostly about romantic relationships. It's about all of our relationships. Parents, kids, siblings, other relatives, friends, and colleagues. Take a look at this, also from Pennsylvania, this next one. Here's a 62-year-old man from Pennsylvania. He says, I wish I had tried harder to foster deeper relationships with my work colleagues. I've worked at the same place for over 30 years, but I'm not sure I would really call any of the people I've worked with a close friend. Think about that. This guy has worked at the same place for 30 years, and he doesn't feel a sense of affinity. He doesn't feel a sense of connection, doesn't feel a sense of belonging with his coworkers. That is a tragedy, truly. That is a tragedy. That is a failure of connection, and this man expresses deep regret about that because he thinks, perhaps erroneously, perhaps accurately, perhaps somewhere in between, that the onus is on him, that he is carrying that burden, that it's his fault. That's what connection regrets are. Connection regrets are, if only I'd reached out. If only I'd reached out. So let's go over these 4 regrets, and I want to make a bigger claim to you based on this. So the 4 regrets are foundation, if only I'd done the work; boldness, if only I'd taken the chance; moral, if only I'd done the right thing; and connection, if only I'd reached out. Now, I think that's interesting in itself. I think the universality of these regrets is interesting. The fact that these regrets were popping up all over the place, from, doesn't matter the continent, almost largely irrespective of nationality, largely irrespective of other kinds of features. There's a big age effect, which we can talk about later. But beyond that, not much demographic differences in these things. And I think what's interesting about these 20,000 regrets is the following: is that when people tell you what they regret the most, they're also telling you what they value the most. Let me say that one more time. When people tell you what they regret the most, they're telling you what they value the most. So these 4 core regrets give us clues about some fundamental human needs. They're kind of a reverse image of what people want out of life. If I have a regret, if I make a mistake or do something stupid 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and I don't remember it today, that's a signal. That's a signal that what happened doesn't matter much to me. But if I bully somebody 20 years ago, or if I don't take an appropriate risk 10 years ago, and it bugs me to this day, that's telling me something. That's telling me something. And this is one of the powers of regret, that regret clarifies what we value. It surfaces some fundamental human needs. So let's take a look at this, because I think all 4 of these regrets surface something fundamental about what people want out of life. So foundation regrets, if only I'd done the work. I think the human need that it reveals is stability. A good life isn't precarious. A good life is not wobbly. A good life has some footing to it. I think that's essential. And I think a lot of times we don't take that into account enough, that a good life has some predictability, some surety, some stolidity. That's foundation regrets. Boldness regrets, if only I'd taken the chance. I think that those are about learning and growth. That we know at some level that we're not here forever. And so we want to use our vanishingly short amount of time on this planet to do something, to learn, to grow, to lead psychologically rich lives. That's why we want to do stuff and be bold. Moral regrets. I am convinced that most people are good and want to be good, and certainly want to be seen as good. That most of us are good, and that a good life is being good. A good life is not only being happy and flourishing in a psychological sense, or even in a material sense. A good life is also flourishing in the moral sense, feeling like you are a good person. I think that's true for almost all of us. That's why people are tormented by these regrets from years ago, decades ago, in which they did the wrong thing. And finally, connection regrets, if only I'd reached out. These are ultimately about love. And I think that in many cases, we have too much of a circumscribed view of love. We want to have a more expansive view of love. We think about love as romantic love. Sometimes we think about it parental-child love. But and obviously those are important. I'm all for romantic love. I've been married for 26 years. I'm all for parental love. I have 3 kids. But love is bigger than that. The universe of the number of people, the collection of people whom we love, I think is more expansive than that, and should be more expansive than that. And when that is thwarted through our own actions, we feel bad about that. And so these regrets, again, this negative emotion tells us what makes life worth living. This negative emotion of regret points the way to a life well lived. What is a life well lived? A life well lived is one where you have some stability, where you're able to learn and grow, where you're being good, and you have people you love and who love you. Period. Full stop. And so regret teaches us what people value the most, what are the components of a good life. But to circle all the way back to the beginning, to this question that I posed, here's the thing. If this is what people want out of their lives, then why would they not want it out of the half of their waking hours of their lives that they're spending at work? If these are the elements of a good life, then why would their life at work be some kind of wild exception to that? People are spending half of their waking hours at work. If this is what they want out of life, it's probably what they want out of their work life. It's probably what makes cultures cohere and what makes people flourish, not only in the totality of their life, but in the part of their life that they're on the job. And so these 4 core regrets give us some clues about that I think at least answer some of the question I posed at the top, which is, how do we build cultures in which people can do their best work and be their best selves? Or to put it, I think, a little bit more coherently, how can we build cultures in which people can do their best work because they can be their best selves? And so all of these regrets, I think, give us lessons in how to build cultures of meaning and purpose and excellence. So take a look at this. So let's think about foundation regrets. What do we need in a culture? We need fair pay and predictability. A good life is not precarious. And I think that in some cases, people at the upper end, sort of the upper half of the income distribution, the upper half of the wealth distribution, don't realize that work life can be very precarious for a lot of people, and that is inherently unsettling. I think one of the things going on now with the Great Resignation is that people looked at their jobs, the labor market tightened up, people looked at their jobs and said, this is a terrible job. It's precarious, I'm not being treated fairly, I'm not being paid fairly, I'm out of here. So, fair pay and predictability. Second, psychological safety. I'm sure many of you have heard this term. It's been popularized really brilliantly by Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. This is about the conditions in which people feel free to speak up, free to challenge authority without having their heads lopped off, free to try stuff, and if it doesn't work, they're not going to get canned. It's a place where people feel safe to assert themselves, where they're not cowering, they're not worried that they're going to get clobbered for being out of line. Cultures that prize individuality and individual expression and trying stuff and experimentation rather than purely controlling kind of mechanisms. Moral. I deeply believe that especially talented people, they want to work for great companies, but they also want to work for good companies. They want to work for companies that are doing the right thing. They are doing the right thing. This is one reason why you see a slowdown in some of the most talented young people in the country choosing not to go to certain tech companies because they feel like those companies might be great companies, but they're not good companies. So this means, as you say, it says in the slide, honesty, transparency, purpose, decency. And finally, connection. On the job, we want a sense of belonging. We want a sense of genuine friendship. This is one reason why I am skeptical that we're going to go to a world where everybody continues to work, all white-collar workers continue to work full-time remotely. I find that very hard to believe because I think it runs against human nature and it runs against what this chorus of 20,000 people have been telling us about their regrets and therefore what makes life worth living. And I also, just to be fair, I also don't think we're going to go back to 2018 where people are sitting by themselves in front of computers all day in a downtown office wearing headphones, doing heads down work and not interacting with anybody. I think that's nuts too. I think I think it's a big question about sorting out what an office is for, who does what, when, and so forth. But what we want out of our work lives is a sense of belonging, a sense of a genuine friendship, and even, to put a very fine point on it, a sense of love. And so, circling back to that first question, if we want to try to build cultures where people can do their best work and be their best selves, we can look to this emotion. We have 20,000 people around the world telling us what they regret, therefore telling us what they want out of life, therefore telling us what they want out of work life. And I really believe that companies, organizations that deepen their commitment to these things, to psychological safety, to fair pay, to honesty, to belonging, those companies are going over the long run to flourish. They're going to attract the best talent, and the best talent is what wins today. So with that lengthy prelude, let me stop and bring Michael back, and we'll try to take some questions.
All right, Dan, God, the energy. And I don't know if everybody can relate to some of the regrets that they've got. I certainly was starting to generate a laundry list. First, I thought I was psychotic and I didn't have many regrets. And then there were a few playground episodes, and I certainly do. I can certainly relate to some of those, those regrets. So, we're going to have a question session. So I welcome the audience to post some messages. We'll do our best to get, through some or all of them. I'm going to have control, so I'm going to ask the first sort of Q&A questions around this. I want to play back an assumption that I've got. Sort of regrets are the opposite of a lighthouse. They are like a repelling guide point looking backwards, going, I'm not going there again, as opposed to a lighthouse that we would head to in the future, and that we're processing as human beings regrets at some level of frequency and saying, I'm going away from that direction, or I'm going for, how would you have us think about this as the audience and soon to be the readers of the books, to go, how do we individually use regrets in a positive way in our personal lives?
Okay, so there are multiple questions bound up in there. I like the metaphor of the opposite of a lighthouse, but I think that in a sense that the regret is you have to go back and look at where you've been, because where you've been is going to give you navigational clues about where to go. All right, so I like the metaphor. Now let's talk very specifically about what to do with these regrets at an individual level. I like to look at this as three steps. The first step is inward. When we make a mistake, when we have a regret, the most important first step is reframing how we think of that regret and how we think about ourselves internally. What typically happens, Michael, is that when we screw up, we treat ourselves very harshly. If you just think about our self-talk, just focus on your self-talk for a moment in the face of a mistake. When we talk to ourselves, we're brutal. If I were to talk to anybody in a workplace the way I talk to myself internally, I'd be fired. All right, so don't do that. All right. Instead, there's a whole body of research I encourage you to look at it called Self-Compassion, pioneered by Kristen Neff at the University of Texas. Self-compassion tells us this: treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Treat yourself with the same generosity you would treat somebody else. Recognize that your mistakes are part of the human condition, and recognize that any mistake is a moment in your life, not the full definition of your life. So what that does is that frees us, that changes the way we see ourselves and our regret, and begins the way to do the next step, which is to talk about our regret or write about our regret. We know that disclosing our regrets is inherently valuable. It's a lifting of the weight. But there's another thing that it does, is that when we convert this blobby mental abstraction into concrete words, we defang it, we make it less menacing. And that can begin the sense-making process. There is something powerful about disclosure. It's not an accident that 15,000 people, now 20,000 people, decided to share their regret with a complete stranger. That's pretty amazing, right? There's an unburdening there. But even if you're uncomfortable disclosing it publicly, and you should be less uncomfortable about that, because there's a lot, we can talk more about that, but even if you're uncomfortable, simply writing about your regret 15 minutes a day for 3 days is effective. So we reframe how we look at ourselves, we disclose and write or talk about it to make sense of it, and then we have to extract a lesson from it. And that's very, very important. And the way we extract lessons from things is to take a step back. So one of the things that I like is, I think for business leaders, like some of the people we have tuned in today, I think one of the best decision-making tools out there is asking yourself, as Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, once said, when he was faced with a tough decision, he would ask himself, what would my successor do? What would my successor do? Get a little bit of self-distancing. And so when we treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt, we disclose to make sense of it, we take a step back and draw a lesson from it, that's the overall way to deal with these regrets. Now, there's some other micro things that we can do, but that's the general approach. And it's not that difficult. It's just that no one has ever taught us how to do that, because we've been sold this bill of goods that we should never look backward and that we should be positive all the time, and that's just complete malarkey.
So practical applications then, let's just put a few use case hypotheticals together. We're wanting to introduce some kind of program, professional services organization, teach managers to be better. And now we've got a research data point frame of reference that says regret might be interesting. How might you suggest we consider
Great question.
Application of that principle in a real world context?
Let me give you some very specific practical things that one can do in that, all right? So one of them is this. If you want to teach your managers to be better, one thing that you can do is you can have each of those managers compile what's called a failure resume. A failure resume. This is an idea from Tina Seelig at Stanford University. And what she suggests is that along with our regular resume, this collection of our accomplishments and our accolades and all that we put together almost the reverse of that, which is I would encourage these managers to put together a list of their failures, their screw-ups, their flops, their mistakes. They don't have to share it. I've done this myself. List of their failures, your screw-ups, your flops, and your mistakes. List that in one column. Then, and this is key, in the next column, list what is the lesson you learned from it. What's the lesson you learned from it? In the third column, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do next based on that? That exercise itself will save you a lot of money in hiring consultants, because that exercise itself will give these managers direction that they've derived themselves from their own lived experience. That's one thing to do. Second thing to do, I would really encourage managers, leaders, to, at some meeting with their team, disclose a regret that they have, explain what they learned from it, and tell people how they're going to do things differently. That, first of all, what we know about disclosure is that when we disclose our mistakes and our vulnerabilities, we fear that people will think less of us. In many cases, most cases, not all, but most cases, people actually think more of us. And so when you do that, you actually build your affinity as a leader, and you role model this behavior that doesn't stigmatize mistakes and regrets, but actually uses them as engines for progress. Another thing that I would do, let me give you a third specific takeaway here, is I am a huge fan of what's called a pre-mortem. Now, I think a lot of people are familiar with a pre-mortem. We know this is an idea from Gary Klein. We know what a post-mortem is. Post-mortem is when a body has died and you examine the body and to try to figure out the cause of death. A pre-mortem is when managers do that and their team do that for a project in advance. Remember, regret depends on our ability to travel to travel through time in our heads. That is a powerful human capacity. It is a human superpower. The fact that we can do time travel in our heads. I can go back to when I was in college and say, oh, if only I'd done that, then this would have been different. I can go back in time, negate what happened, imagine what would have occurred as a result of that. Use that time traveling power in a prospective way. And here's how a pre-mortem works. Let's say you're starting a project, you're doing a project, you're about to start a project. Go forward, say 2 years, and say it's 2 years from now. Everybody get in the time machine. We're going 2 years into the future, and 2 years into the future, this project is a complete disaster. What went wrong? And you talk honestly, what went wrong? We didn't set aside enough budget. We had too much budget. We had too many people involved. We had too few people involved. We didn't get buy-in from the top. Whatever. You go through systematically what went wrong as you imagine what went wrong. Then you get back in your time machine, come back to the present, and avoid those mistakes. So again, when we reckon honestly with mistakes and screw-ups and negative emotions, when we don't ignore them and we don't wallow in them, they can help us become better. Michael, there's so much evidence of this. There's so much evidence of this. It makes me crazy that we're not doing it more.
I think you just helped me understand the Douglas Adams reference to you got to ask the right question. It's not, the answer's 42. Thank you for sharing that for those that don't know that reference. Douglas Adams, great book. So I want to, reference some, commentary coming in on the chat, and something you'd mentioned earlier, that I think is very topical for this audience, and that is the balance between the work life and the personal life. And it was obviously one of the regret points, and the context was he was there for 30 years and had no personal relationships.
Yeah.
Some of us can see that, maybe anticipate be experiencing that. But beyond or above that particular, circumstance, and with your vantage point, has those two worlds blurred further over the last 2 years in a quite transformational way, and will not likely unhinge again? Welcome your perspectives on that.
Fascinating question. I started writing about that very question 20 years ago in a book that you mentioned called Free Agent Nation, about the rise of people working for themselves. And that book came out like before the gig economy, before social media, before all that kind of stuff. And I pondered that. And one of the things that you see is that through most of human civilization, there was a connection and affinity, a unity to work and family. That we had a farm, and the family worked on the farm, and this is our business. We had a shop, and we lived above the shop. That most of human civilization, there has actually been an affinity between our work lives and our personal lives. That in some ways, post-World War II industrial world is the aberration, not the norm. We happen to be born into that, and so we think of it, any situation we're born into, we think of as the right answer, like that's the way it's supposed to be. But maybe that's not the way it's supposed to be. And I think that we're going to sort this out. I think there is an affinity between work and home, but I don't think that there should be a complete overlap and merging. I don't think that's healthy. I think what you want in general is, and we're going to figure this out, but I'll just give you my theory here. I think what we want is a soft separation, not a hard separation, but a soft separation. And again, at the risk of sounding like I'm only validating my own experiences, let me tell you my situation here. I'm talking to you today from a refurbished one-car garage behind my house in Washington, D.C. I commute to work. I go 22 steps out that back door into this office, right? That is a soft separation. I think that in some ways that soft separation is better than the purely hard separation, which has all kinds of externalities, like commuting. But I also think that when if you have a family with kids, that mom and dad having their work stuff all over the playroom is probably not good. I think that's too much melding. And so I think we want an affinity, but not a complete merger. And I don't think there's a single right way to do that. And I do think that what's going to happen now is there's going to be a sorting process where we sort that out. But I don't want us to take the idea that there needs to be a hard division between work and personal as somehow the norm of human civilization. It is the exception in human civilization.
That's an interesting perspective. All right. So just as the wind up, firstly, on behalf of all of the attendees, I'd like to, really thank you, Daniel, for taking some time to be with a New York Times bestselling author multiple times is an honor and privilege. Thanks for sharing that energy with us. Two, as a follow-up to this, we will send both instructions and information for where you'd like us to ship a copy of the book. And if there's any particular questions that we didn't get to cover or talk about that you'd like us to direct to Dan, we certainly will. But, again, round of applause to you, Dan, for a great presentation. Excellent.
Thank you.
Much success ahead. And that we may all take some of those learnings. I certainly think that, we all can relate to regret on a personal level. May we have fewer regrets? Is there a nice Chinese Jewish thing about regrets? Because something tells me there's a cultural context also going on in regret.
I think that there's some cultures are more inclined to look back, and some cultures do a better job of dealing with negative emotions. It's a fascinating point. I mean, I'll let you go, but I think that religious traditions do a much better job of dealing with regret and negative emotions than secular traditions do. Every religious tradition, not every, but many religious traditions have systematic ways to deal with negative emotions. And I think the problem is that a lot of us who aren't religious are left floundering because we don't know what to do when we experience a negative emotion. So maybe this body of ideas will help.
Right. Yes. We could go on that one, but all right. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate everybody's time and interest. Wish you all health, happy, and safety. And, as I like to say, be proud of your work and proud of your company. All the best to everybody.
Thanks, everybody.